Chapter 2: How to Get Clients. 15 years ago, I was an obscure tobacco farmer in Pennsylvania. Today, I preside over one of the best advertising agencies in the United States. With billings of $55 million a year, a payroll of $5 million in offices in New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Toronto. How did this come to pass? As my Amish friends have said, it wonders me. On the day in 1948 when I hung out my shingle, I issued the following order of the day. This is a new agency, struggling for its life. For some time we shall be overworked and underpaid. In hiring, the emphasis will be on youth. We are looking for young Turks. I have no use for toadies or hacks. I seek gentlemen with brains. Agencies are as big as they deserve to be. We are starring this one on a shoestring, but we are going to make it a great agency before 1960. The next day, I made a list of the 5 clients I wanted most. General Foods, Bristol-Myers, Campbell Soup Company, Lever Brothers, and Shell. In the old days, it had not been unknown for advertisers of this magnitude to engage dark horse agencies. When the head of a mammoth agency solicited the Camel cigarette account, he promised to assign 30 copywriters to it, but the canny head of R.J. Reynolds replied, "How about one good one?" Then he gave his account to a young copywriter called Bill Esty, in whose agency it has remained for 28 years. In 1937, Walter Chrysler gave the Plymouth account to Sterling Getchell, then in his 32nd year. In 1940, Ed Little gave most of the Colgate account to a dark horse named Ted Bates, and General Foods discovered Young and Rubicam when that agency was only 1 year old. Writing after his retirement, John Orr Young, one of the founders of Young and Rubicam, offered this advice to manufacturers in search of an agency. If you are lucky enough to find some young men with that special energy and daring which leads them into business for themselves, you will benefit from having that incalculably valuable quality serving you. It is easy to be beguiled by acres of desks, departments, and other big agency appurtenances. What counts is the real motive power of the agency, the creative potency. Several great advertising successes have been achieved by advertisers who benefited by the incentive, ambition, and energy of an advertising organization in process of building a reputation. These large advertisers sought to buy their advertising agency service on a rising market during the agent's work close days or pre-adipose period. By the time I came on the scene, the big advertisers had grown more cautious. God had joined the side of the big battalions. Stanley Resser, who had been head of J. Walter Thompson since 1916, warned me, "The concentration of industry into huge corporations is being reflected in the world of advertising. The big accounts now require such a wide range of services that only the huge agencies can handle them. Why don't you give up your pipe dream and join J. Walter Thompson?" To new agencies about to embark on the pursuit of their first clients, I bequeath a set piece which worked magic in my early days. I used to ask prospective clients to ponder the life cycle of a typical agency, the inevitable pattern of rise and decline, from dynamite to dry rot. Once every few years, a great new agency is born. It is ambitious, hard-working, full of dynamite. It gets accounts from soft old agencies. It does great work. The years pass. The founders get rich and tired. Their creative fires go out. They become extinct volcanoes. The agency may continue to prosper. Its original momentum is not yet spent. It has powerful contacts. But it has grown too big. It produces dull, routine campaigns based on the echo of old victories. Dry rot sets in. The emphasis shifts to collateral services, to conceal the agency's creative bankruptcy. At this stage, it begins losing accounts to vital new agencies, ruthless upstarts who work hard and put all their dynamite into their advertisements. We can all name famous agencies which are moribund. You hear demoralizing whispers in their corridors, long before the truth dawns on their clients. At this point, I could always see my prospective client struggling to conceal the fact that I had hit a nerve. Could it be that I was describing his moribund agency? Today, 14 years later, I am shocked by this villainous stratagem. My scholarly uncle Sir Humphrey Rolleston used to say of physicians, "First they get on, then they get honor, then they get honest." Honest. I am now approaching the stage of honesty, and butter wouldn't melt in my mouth. But everything looked different when my bank account was empty. As Gilbert's Pirate King explained, when I sally forth to seek my prey, I help myself in a royal way. I sink a few more ships, it's true, than a well-bred monarch ought to do. But many a king on a first-class throne, if he wants to call his crown his own, must manage somehow to get through more dirty work than ever do. Following Henry Ford's advice to his dealers that they should solicit by personal visitation, I started by soliciting advertisers who did not employ an agency at all, figuring that I lacked the credentials to push any incumbent agency out of bed. My first target was Wedgwood, China, which spent about $40,000 a year. Mr. Wedgwood and his advertising manageress received me with the greatest civility. "We dislike agencies," she said. "They are nothing but a nuisance. So we prepare our own advertisements. Do you have any fault to find with them?" "On the contrary," I replied, "I admire them. But if you will just allow me to buy the space for you, the magazines will give me the commission. It will cost you nothing, and I will promise never to darken your door again." Hensley Wedgwood is a kindly man, and the next morning he wrote me a formal letter of appointment, to which I replied by telegram, "A full peal of Kent treble bob major." We were in business, but my capital was only $6,000, and this was scarcely enough to keep me afloat until the first commissions arrived. Fortunately for me, my elder brother Francis was then managing director of Mather and Crowther Limited, a venerable and distinguished advertising agency in London. He came to the rescue by persuading his partners to augment my capital and lend me their name. My old friend Bobby Bevan of S.H. Benson Limited, another English agency, followed suit, and Sir Francis Meynell got Sir Stafford Cripps to authorize the transatlantic investment. Bobby and Francis insisted that I find an American to be head of the agency. They did not believe that one of their fellow countrymen could persuade American manufacturers to give him any business. To expect an Englishman or even a Scotsman to be successful in American advertising would be absurd. Advertising was not part of the British genius. Indeed, the British had always abhorred the whole idea of advertising. As Punch put it in 1848, "Let us be a nation of shopkeepers as much as we please, but there is no necessity that we should become a nation of advertisers." Out of 5,500 knights, baronets, and peers alive today, only one is an advertising agent. Prejudice against advertising and its practitioners is less marked in the United States. Neil McElroy, a former advertising manager of Procter & Gamble, was appointed Secretary of Defense in Eisenhower's administration. Chester Bowles graduated from Madison Avenue to become Governor of Connecticut, Ambassador to India, and Under-Secretary of State. But even in the United States, it is rare for advertising men to be appointed to important jobs in government. This is a pity, because some of them carry more guns than most of the lawyers, professors, bankers, and journalists who are favored. Senior advertising men are better equipped to define problems and opportunities, to set up short-range and long-range goals, to measure results, to lead large executive forces, to make lucid presentations to committees, and to operate within the disciplines of a budget. Observation of my elders and betters in other advertising agencies leads me to believe that many of them are more objective, better organized, more vigorous, and harder working than their opposite numbers in legal practice, teaching, banking, and journalism. I had very little to offer the kind of American executive who would qualify to head up an agency. However, after casting about for several months, I invited Anderson Hewitt to leave the Chicago office of J. Walter Thompson and become my boss. He was a dynamo of energy, he was unabashed in the presence of nabobs, and he had connections whose influence made my mouth water. Within 1 year, Andy Hewitt brought in 2 splendid accounts. With the help of John Lafarge, who was billed as our copy chief, he landed Sunoco, and 3 months later his father-in-law Arthur Page induced the Chase Bank to hire us. When we ran out of capital, Andy Hewitt persuaded J.P. Morgan & Company to lend us $100,000 with no security except the confidence of his uncle Leffingwell, who was then chairman of Morgan. Alas, my partnership with Andy was not a happy one. We tried to conceal our differences from the staff, but children always know when their parents are at loggerheads. After 4 years of discord, exacerbated by the pressures of our meteoric success, the agency began to split into 2 factions. After much agony for all concerned, Andy resigned and I became head of the agency. I take comfort from the fact that he went on to great things at other agencies, unencumbered by an insufferable partner. When we started our agency, we placed ourselves in competition with 3,000 other agencies. Our first job was to escape from obscurity so that prospective clients would add us to their shopping lists. We succeeded in doing this faster than I had dared hope, and it may be helpful to other adventurers if I describe how we went about it. First, I invited 10 reporters from the advertising trade press to luncheon. I told them of my insane ambition to build a major agency from scratch. From that point on, they gave me priceless tips on new business and printed every release I sent them, however trivial. Bless them. Rosser Reeves protested that nobody went to the bathroom at our agency without the news appearing in the trade press. Second, I followed Edward L. Bernay's advice to make no more than 2 speeches a year. Every speech I made was calculated to provoke the greatest possible stir on Madison Avenue. The first was a lecture to the Art Directors Club in which I unloaded everything I knew about the graphics of advertising. Before going home, I gave each art director in my audience a mimeographed list of 39 rules for making good layouts. Those ancient rules are still being passed around on Madison Avenue. In my next speech, I denounced the fatuity of the advertising courses being offered in colleges and offered $10,000 to help start a college of advertising which would issue licenses to practice. This idiotic proposal hit the front pages. Soon the trade press took to calling me for comment on most of the issues that came up. I always spoke my mind, and I was always quoted. Third, I made friends with men whose jobs brought them into contact with major advertisers. The researchers, the public relations consultants, the management engineers, and the space salesmen. They saw in me a possible source of future business for themselves, but what they got was a pitch on the merits of our agency. Fourth, I sent frequent progress reports to 600 people in every walk of life. This barrage of direct mail was read by the most august advertisers. For example, when I solicited part of the Seagram account, Sam Bronfman played back to me the last 2 paragraphs of a 16-page speech I had sent him shortly before, and he hired us. Gentle reader, if you are shocked by these confessions of self-advertisement, I can only plead that if I had behaved in a more professional way, it would have taken me 20 years to arrive. I had neither the time nor the money to wait. I was poor, unknown, and in a hurry. Meanwhile, I was working from dawn until midnight, 6 days a week, creating campaigns for the clients who hired our infant agency. Some of those campaigns made advertising history. At first, we took every account we could get: a toy tortoise, a patent hairbrush, an English motorcycle. But I always kept my eye on my list of 5 blue-chip targets and put our meager profits to work building the kind of organization which I thought would ultimately attract their attention. I always showed prospective clients the dramatic improvement that followed when Ogilvy, Benson, and Mather took accounts away from old agencies. In every case, we have blazed new trails, and in every case, sales have gone up. But I was never able to keep a straight face when I said this. If a company's sales had not grown more than 6-fold in the previous 21 years, its growth had been less than average. Some very ordinary agencies had the good fortune to hold portfolios of very ordinary accounts in 1945. All they had to do was fasten their seatbelts and be lofted to enormous heights on the curve of a skyrocketing economy. It takes extraordinary ability for an agency to get accounts when everybody's sales are booming. But when the economy is jolted by a recession, the old fossils come unstuck, and vigorous new agencies leap forward. An agency's first clients are the hardest to get because it has no credentials, no record of success, no reputation. At this stage, it often pays to speculate by conducting a pilot survey on some aspect of your prospective client's business. There are few manufacturers whose curiosity is not piqued when you offer to show them the results of such a survey. The first time I tried this was with Helena Rubinstein, who had changed agencies 17 times in the previous 25 years. Her account was then being handled by an agency which belonged to her younger son, Horace Titus. Our speculative research revealed that his advertising was ineffectual. Madame Rubinstein showed no interest in the results of our research. But when I uncorked some advertisements based on it, she perked up. showing particular interest in photographs of my wife taken before and after treatment in the Rubinstein salon. "I think your wife looked better before," said Madame. To my amazement, Horace Titus advised his mother to remove her account from the agency he owned and give it to me. This she did. Horace and I became friends and remained so until his death 8 years later. In 1958, we were invited by Standard Oil, New Jersey, to show them what kind of advertising we would run if they were to hire us. 10 days later, I presented them with a hamper of 14 different campaigns and won the account. Next to luck, fertility, and midnight oil are the best weapons to use in hunting new business. We spent $30,000 on a speculative presentation to Bromo Seltzer. It was based on a cogently argued thesis that the majority of headaches are of psychosomatic origin. But Lemoyne Billings, who was then Bromo Seltzer's advertising manager, preferred a presentation made by Lennon and Newell. Today we have neither the time nor the stomach to prepare speculative campaigns. Instead, we show our prospects what we have done for other manufacturers, we explain our policies, and we introduce our department heads. We try to reveal ourselves as we really are, warts and all. If the prospective client likes the look of us, he hires us. If he doesn't like the look of us, we are better off without him. When KLM Royal Dutch Airlines decided to change agencies, they invited Ogilvy, Benson and Mather, and 4 others to prepare speculative campaigns. We were first on their tour of inspection. I opened the meeting by saying, "We have prepared nothing. Instead, we would like you to tell us about your problems. Then you can visit the other 4 agencies on your list. They have all prepared speculative campaigns. If you like any of them, your choice will be easy. If you don't, come back and hire us. We will then embark on the research which always precedes the preparation of advertisements at our agency." The Dutchman accepted this bleak proposition, and 5 days later, after seeing the speculative campaigns prepared by the other agencies, they came back and hired us, to my great joy. You cannot generalize. In some cases, it pays to show speculative advertisements, as with Jersey and Helena Rubinstein. In some cases, it pays to be the one agency which refuses to do so, as with KLM. The agencies which are most successful in new business are those whose spokesmen show the most sensitive insight into the psychological makeup of the prospective client. Rigidity and salesmanship do not combine. There is one stratagem which seems to work in almost every case. Get the prospect to do most of the talking. The more you listen, the wiser he thinks you are. One day I went to see Alexander Konov, an elderly Russian who had made a fortune manufacturing zippers. After showing me his factory in Newark, every department was festooned with 6-foot zippers for remains bags. He took me back to New York in his chauffeur-driven Cadillac. I noticed that he was holding a copy of the New Republic, a magazine read by rather few clients. "Are you a Democrat or a Republican?" I asked. "I am a socialist. I played an active part in the Russian Revolution." I asked if he had known Kerensky. "Not that revolution," Konov snorted. "The revolution of 1904. When I was a boy, I used to walk 5 miles to work in a cigarette factory, barefoot in the snow. My real name is Kaganovich. The FBI thinks that I am the brother of the Kaganovich, who is now in the Politburo. They are mistaken." He roared with laughter. "When I first came to America, I worked as a machinist in Pittsburgh for 50 cents an hour. My wife was an embroiderer. She made $14 a week, but never got paid." This proud old socialist millionaire went on to tell me that he had known Lenin and Trotsky intimately during the days of their exile. I listened, so we got the account. Silence can be golden. Not long ago, the advertising manager of Ampex came to see me scouting for a new agency. For once in my life, I had lunched too well and had lost the power of speech. All I could do was to motion the prospective client to a seat and look at him in a questioning way. He talked for an hour without interruption from me. I could see that he was impressed by my thoughtfulness. It isn't every advertising agent who is so taciturn on these occasions. Then, to my horror, he asked me a question. Had I ever heard an Ampex record player? I shook my head, too potted for speech. "Well, I want you to hear our equipment in your home. It comes in different styles. How is your home decorated?" I shrugged my shoulders, not trusting myself to speak. "Modern?" I shook my head, strong, silent man. "Early American?" Again I shook my head, still waters run deep. 18th century? I nodded pensively but held my tongue. A week later, the Ampex arrived. It was magnificent, but my partners decided that the account was too small to be profitable, and I was obliged to withdraw. Handling accounts once you have got them is deadly serious business. You are spending other people's money, and the fate of their company often rests in your hands. But I regard the hunt for new clients as a sport. If you play it grimly, you will die of ulcers. If you play it with a lighthearted gusto, you will survive your failures without losing sleep. Play to win, but enjoy the fun. In my youth, I sold kitchen stoves at the Ideal Homes exhibition in London. Each sale required a personalized pitch, which took me 40 minutes to administer. The problem was to pick out from the milling crowds those rare individuals who were rich enough to buy my stove, which cost $400. I learned to smell them. They smoked Turkish cigarettes, a mark of aristocracy like an old Etonian tie. In later years, I developed similar techniques for smelling out big advertisers in a crowd. Once I came away from a New York luncheon of the Scottish Council with the presentiment that 4 of the men I had just met for the first time would one day become my clients. And so it turned out. The biggest account I have ever got was Shell. The Shell people liked what we had done for Rolls-Royce well enough to include us on a list of agencies which they were considering. To each agency, they sent a long and searching questionnaire. Now, it so happens that I deplore the practice of selecting agencies by questionnaire, and I have consigned dozens of them to garbage cans. When a company called Stahl-Meyer sent me a questionnaire, I replied, "Who is Stahl-Meyer?" But I stayed up all night drafting answers to the Shell questionnaire. My answers were more candid than is customary, but I thought they would make a favorable impression on Max Burns, a fellow director of the New York Philharmonic, who was then president of Shell, if only they were passed up to him. The next morning I learned that he had gone to England, so I flew to London and left a message at his hotel, saying that I wanted to see him. For 10 days there was no reply. I had almost given up hope when my telephone operator reported that Mr. Burns wanted me to lunch with him on the following day. I had already engaged myself to lunch with the Secretary of State for Scotland, so I sent Burns the following signal. "Mr. Ogilvy is lunching with the Secretary of State for Scotland at the House of Commons. They would be delighted if you would join them." On the way to the house, it was pouring rain and we shared an umbrella. I was able to give Burns the gist of my answers to his questionnaire. Back in New York the next day, he introduced me to the man who was about to succeed him as president of Shell, the remarkable Dr. Monroe Speight. 3 weeks later, Monty Spott telephoned to say that we had the account. I was so dumbfounded by this momentous news that my aplomb deserted me, and I could only blurt out, "God help us." Our appointment by Shell forced us to leave the service of Standard Oil, New Jersey. I liked the Jersey people, and I was proud of the part we had played in persuading them to save the superb Play of the Week program on television. David Susskind said in Life that if there were a Congressional Medal of Honor for business, this sponsor should get it. But it was not generally known that in order to secure the sponsorship of that program for Jersey, I had been obliged to surrender all my 15% commission to Lorillard, the manufacturers of Old Gold and Kent cigarettes. Lorillard had preempted one spot on the doomed program, and only my offer to give them my commission, $6,000 a week, persuaded them to make room for Jersey. I was disappointed with Jersey for refusing to make good my sacrifice. No agency can afford to work without pay, so I transferred my allegiance to Shell. Sometimes I have made disastrous bloopers in the pursuit of new business. When I met Sir Alexander Till Maxwell, head of the British Travel and Holidays Association, we needed a new account in a hurry. He snubbed me at the start. "Our advertising," he said, "is good, very good indeed. I haven't the remotest intention of changing agencies." I replied, "When Henry VIII was dying, it was believed that any man who dared to tell him the awful truth would be decapitated. But reasons of state required that a volunteer should be found, and Henry Denny stepped forward. King Henry was so grateful to Denny for his courage that he gave him a pair of gloves and a knighthood. Sir Henry Denny was my ancestor. His example inspires me to tell you that your advertising is very bad." Maxwell exploded and never spoke to me again. But shortly afterward, he gave us the British travel account, on condition that I play no part in it. And for many years, my partners had to conceal the fact that I was in charge. Our campaign was so successful that the number of American visitors going to Britain quadrupled in 10 years. Today, Britain earns more from its visitors than any other European country except Italy. For a small and damp island, this is a pretty staggering success, says The Economist. In due course, Sir Alexander Maxwell retired, and I was able to come out of hiding. The man who now sits in his chair is Lord Mabane, a former cabinet minister. When I go to England, he sends his car to drive me down to Rye, where he lives in Henry James's house. English clients employ rum retainers. The butler at the Rolls-Royce guest house near Derby entered our bedroom on a hot summer morning without knocking. There lay my wife, sound asleep. Poking his moon face into her ear, he shouted, "Poached or fried, madam?" Our solicitation of the Armstrong Cork account took a bizarre course. At the start, I was bidden to lunch with Max Banzoff, the advertising manager, at his golf club near Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Our table looked out on the 18th green, and for 2 hours, Max regaled me with golfing stories. His assessment of advertising agents appeared to revolve around their ability to hit golf balls. Did I share his love of golf? I have never been on a golf course in my life, but to admit it at that moment would have destroyed my chances of landing the account. So I mumbled an ambiguous evasion to the effect that I had no time for games. Max suggested that we play a round, then and there. I protested that I had not brought my clubs. "I will lend you mine." But Max gracefully accepted the next excuse I offered, which had to do with my digestion. And before I left, he explained that the only remaining impediment to the success of my solicitation lay in the fact that Henning Prentice, his chairman, was a devoted and lifelong friend of Bruce Barton, whose agency had enjoyed a monopoly on Armstrong advertising for 40 years. The following day, luck intervened on my side. The Donegal Society invited me to address their annual reunion in one of the oldest Presbyterian churches in the United States. I was to speak from the pulpit, and Mr. Prentice was to be in the congregation. My sermon was fixed for June 23rd, that marvelous midsummer day on which my grandfather, my father, and I were born. As my subject, I took the role of my fellow countrymen in building America, without referring directly to the one Scotsman on Madison Avenue. Ralph Waldo Emerson and Thomas Carlyle once went for a walk through the Scottish countryside. When Emerson saw the poor soil around Ecclefechan, he asked Carlyle, "What do you raise on land like this?" Carlyle replied, "We raise men." "What manner of men do they raise on that poor Scottish soil? And what becomes of them when they come to the United States?" "They work hard." I was brought up with my father's favorite proverb ringing in my ears: "Hard work never killed a man." Patrick Henry was a Scot, and John Paul Jones was the son of a Scottish gardener. Alan Pinkerton came from Scotland and started the Secret Service. It was Pinkerton who uncovered the first plot to assassinate Lincoln in February 1861. 35 justices of the United States Supreme Court have been Scotsmen, and industrialists galore, including an industrialist who has contributed so much to the prosperity and culture of your own Lancaster County, Mr. Henning Prentice of the Armstrong Cork Company. From my vantage point in the pulpit, I was able to observe Mr. Prentice's reaction to this apostrophe. He did not look displeased, and a few weeks later he agreed to transfer part of the Armstrong account to our agency. Of all the new business hoedowns in which I have engaged, the one with the largest number of contestants was the United States Travel Service. No less than 137 agencies threw their hats into the ring. Our campaigns for Britain and Puerto Rico had been so successful that we were uniquely qualified to advertise the United States as a tourist destination. I longed to infect my fellow Europeans with my own passion for the United States. I had spent my life advertising toothpaste and margarine. What a welcome change it would be to advertise the United States. Many of the agencies which competed for the account were able to bring political influence to bear. I had none. Nevertheless, we got on the short list of 6, and were invited to make a presentation in Washington. Assistant Secretary of Commerce William Reuter, in private life a fellow denizen of Madison Avenue, subjected me to a merciless cross-examination which exposed the one weakness in my case: a lack of branch offices in foreign countries. After making more than 100 new business presentations, I have come to know by the end of the meeting whether I have won or lost. That afternoon I knew that I had lost, and I returned to New York in despair. 10 days went by and no announcement was made. I was comforted by my staff, and we laid bets on which of our competitors would win. Then, one Saturday morning, I was awakened by Western Union. The Secretary of Commerce had appointed Ogilvy, Benson, and Mather to do the Visit USA advertising in Britain, France, and Germany. This was the most glorious telegram I had received since Oxford telegraphed the news of my scholarship at Christ Church 30 years before. Every advertisement I write for the U.S. Travel Service is a bread-and-butter letter from a grateful immigrant. Before our campaign broke, I warned the Department of Commerce that it was bound to attract criticism. The crunch will come when our first advertisement appears. Whatever the advertisements say or don't say, we are going to be subjected to criticism. I know this from long experience with the British travel advertising. But in the last analysis, our campaign can only be defended or attacked on the basis of results. Research had revealed that our greatest single obstacle lay in the fact that Europeans had an exaggerated concept of the cost of visiting the USA. We decided to attack the problem head-on. Instead of saying in a bland, innocuous way that you can tour America for less than you suppose, we gave a specific figure. £35 a week. This was arrived at after careful verification. For example, before deciding on a reasonable minimum price for a hotel room in New York, we sent one of our copywriters to check the beds at the Hotel Winslow, which charges $6 a night. She found them satisfactory. But our critics took the position that £35 a week was far too low. They were not aware of the realities of the problem. 1. Travel from Europe had previously been confined to businessmen with expense accounts and the very rich. It was vitally important to enlarge the market by attracting tourists with more modest means. Fort Knox was leaking gold, and foreign exchange was urgently needed. 2. Whereas more than half the families in the United States have incomes in excess of $5,000, only 3% of the families in England have incomes of this magnitude. It was therefore important to make our product available to them at the lowest possible price. They could always spend more if they wanted to. 3. It is better, I argued, for middle-income Europeans to visit the United States, even if they have to economize, than not to come at all. The thrill of seeing New York, San Francisco, and the wide open spaces far transcends any hardships involved in economizing. Foreign tourists bring badly needed foreign exchange, and research shows that almost all of them go home with a more favorable attitude toward the United States. Our advertisements achieved record-breaking readership when they appeared in European newspapers, and they produced so many inquiries that the London, Paris, and Frankfurt offices of the U.S. Travel Service had to work far into the night. Our campaign triggered an avalanche of editorial publicity, which was probably without precedent in the history of advertising. The Daily Mail sent its star feature writer to the United States. In his first dispatch, he cabled, "At the same time as President Kennedy invited me and all the other millions of Europe to try the novelty of tourism in the U.S., he issued a secret directive to 180 million of Americans to be nice to us." How else to explain the embarrassing generosity, the overwhelming kindness, the extreme courtesy at every turn? The Daily Express instructed its New York correspondent to write a series of articles on the subject. An editorial in the Manchester Guardian referred to our advertisements as famous, after only 3 of them had appeared. Handelsblatt, the leading financial newspaper in Germany, wrote, "This is a very truthful campaign. The U.S. Travel Service has introduced its advertising to the West German tourist market with a blare of trumpets. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. 8 months after our campaign started, French tourist traffic to the United States was up 27%, British traffic was up 24%, and German traffic was up 18%. In 1956, I participated in an unusual adventure, a joint solicitation with another agency. Ben Sonnenberg persuaded Arthur Fatt of Gray and myself to solicit the Greyhound bus account. In tandem, he specified that I was to upgrade the image of bus travel, while Gray was to put arses on the seats. Fatt and I flew to San Francisco, where the Greyhound people were holding a convention. As soon as we had checked into our hotel, he showed me his presentation. His research department had penetrated to the heart of the problem, and his copywriters had developed a slogan which hit the nail on the head. "It's such a common to take the bus and leave the driving to us." Forthwith, I called the Greyhound advertising manager on the house phone and invited him to join me in Fat's room. Arthur Fat has just shown me his half of our joint presentation. It is the best I have ever seen. I advise you to give your whole account to Gray. To make your decision easier, I am now returning to New York. I then left the room, and Gray was appointed. I have never wanted to get an account so big that I could not afford to lose it. The day you do that, you commit yourself to living with fear. Frightened agencies lose the courage to give candid advice. Once you lose that, you become a lackey. This was what led me to refuse an invitation to compete for the Edsel account. I wrote to Ford, "Your account would represent 1/2 of our total billing. This would make it difficult for us to sustain our independence of counsel. If we had entered the Edsel contest, and if we had won it, Ogilvy, Benson, and Mather would have gone down the drain with Edsel. We take immense pains to select our clients. It is true that we have selected a few clients who have not yet selected us, but we persevere in their pursuit, and we turn down an average of 59 less desirable accounts every year. It is not generally realized that there aren't enough first-class agencies to go around. For example, when the soap manufacturers have roped off their 21 agencies, there are only 2 left which could meet their standards. My ambition is to add 1 new client every 2 years. Faster growth would force us to engage new staff faster than we could train them, and to divert too much of our best brainpower from the service of our old clients to the difficult work involved in planning the first campaigns for new ones. I seek accounts which meet 10 criteria. 1. The product must be one which we would be proud to advertise. On those few occasions when we have advertised products which we privately despised, we have failed. A lawyer may be able to defend a murderer whom he knows to be guilty, and a surgeon may be able to operate on a man he dislikes, but professional detachment doesn't work in advertising. Some measure of personal commitment is required before a copywriter can sell a product. 2. I never accept an account unless I believe that we can do a conspicuously better job than the previous agency. When the New York Times asked us to do their advertising, I declined, because I didn't think we could produce better advertisements than the brilliant ones they had been running. 3. I steer clear of products whose sales have been falling over a long period, because this almost always means that there is an intrinsic weakness in the product, or that the management of the company is incompetent. No amount of good advertising can make up for either of these deficiencies. However hungry a new agency may be, it must have the self-restraint to turn down moribund accounts. A surgeon with an established practice can afford to have an occasional patient die on the operating table, but a young surgeon's whole career can be ruined by such a misadventure. I used to dread having one of our accounts die on our operating table. 4. It is important to find out whether the prospective client wants his agency to make a profit. I have had the galling experience of helping to make clients into multimillionaires while losing my shirt in their service. The average profit made by advertising agencies is now less than half of 1%. We tread a narrow knife edge poised between over-servicing our clients and going broke, or under-servicing them and getting fired. 5. If the account is unlikely to be profitable, would it give you a chance to create remarkable advertising? We never made much profit on Guinness or Rolls-Royce, but they gave us golden opportunities to demonstrate our creative excellence. There is no quicker way to put a new agency on the map. The only danger is that it gives you a lopsided reputation. The business world assumes that if a small agency demonstrates a genius for creating great advertisements, it must be weak in research and marketing. It seldom occurs to people that if you set high standards in one department, you are likely to set high standards in every department. I myself was soon typecast as a good copywriter, but an ignorant in every other department. This irritated me because my long suit was not copy at all, but research. I had run the Audience Research Institute for Dr. Gallup. The biggest problem which besets almost every agency is the problem of producing good campaigns. Copywriters, art directors, and television producers are easily come by, but the number of men who can preside over an agency's entire creative output, perhaps 100 new campaigns every year, can be numbered on the fingers of one hand. These rare trumpeter swans must be capable of inspiring a motley crew of writers and artists. They must be sure-footed judges of campaigns for a wide range of different products. They must be good presenters, and they must have a colossal appetite for midnight oil. Word got around that I was one of these rare birds, and it occurred to several of the big agencies that they should hire me, even if they had to take my whole agency to get me. In a period of 3 years, I received such offers from J. Walter Thompson, McCann Erickson, BBDO, Leo Burnett, and 5 other agencies. If it had occurred to any of them to woo me with gold, I would have succumbed. But they all made the mistake of assuming that I was more interested in creative challenge, whatever that may be. A lopsided reputation for creativity disqualifies an agency from getting big accounts, but it is something you must risk if you are ever going to escape from obscurity. It wasn't until Esty Stowell joined us in 1957 that our agency began to acquire a reputation for strength in all departments. He had been executive vice president of Benton and Bowles, which was widely regarded as the best of all agencies in the marketing area. He was the symbol we required to offset my reputation as a mere copywriter. He was also a very able man. With a sigh of relief, I turned over to him the management of every department in the agency except the creative departments. From that point on, our agency began to grow in bigger chunks. 6. The relationship between a manufacturer and his advertising agency is almost as intimate as the relationship between a patient and his doctor. Make sure that you can live happily with your prospective client before you accept his account. When a prospective client comes to see me for the first time, I start by finding out why he wants to change agencies. If I have reason to suspect that he has been resigned, I ask a friend in his previous agency. Only recently I discovered in the nick of time that a prospective client had been resigned. His previous agency told me that he needed a psychiatrist more than an agency. 7. I avoid clients for whom advertising is only a marginal factor in their marketing mix. They have an awkward tendency to raid their advertising appropriations whenever they need cash for other purposes. I prefer clients for whom advertising is the breath of life. We then find ourselves operating at the indispensable heart of our client's business, instead of on the frivolous fringe. On the whole, the most lucrative accounts are products of low unit cost, universal use, and frequent purchase. They generate larger budgets and more opportunities for testing than high-priced durables. 8. I never take new products before they have emerged from the laboratory unless they are included in a hamper with another product which has already reached national distribution. It costs an agency more to steer a new product through test markets than to handle a going product, and 8 out of 10 new products die in test markets. With an overall profit margin of 0.5%, we cannot afford this risk. 9. If you aspire to produce great advertising, never take associations as clients. Some years ago, we were invited to compete for the Rayon Manufacturers Association account. I duly presented myself at their headquarters and was ushered into a pompous committee room. "Mr. Ogilvy," said the chairman, "we are interviewing several agencies. You have exactly 15 minutes to plead your case. Then I will ring this bell, and the representative of the next agency, who is already waiting outside, will follow you." Before launching into my pitch, I asked 3 questions. How many of the end uses for Rayon must be covered in your campaign? Answer: automobile tires, furnishing fabrics, industrial products, women's clothing, men's clothing. How much money is available? Answer: $600,000. How many people must okay the advertisements? Answer: the 12 members of the committee, representing 12 manufacturers. "Ring the bell," I said, and walked out. Them's the conditions what prevail with almost all association accounts. Too many masters, too many objectives, too little money. Montaigne. Sometimes a prospective client offers you business on condition that you hire an individual whom he believes to be indispensable to the management of his advertising. The agencies which play this game wind up with a crew of politicians who cock snooks at their plans board, ignore their copy chief, and blackmail their management. I have sometimes hired able men on condition that they did not bring their vest pocket accounts with them. However thoroughly you investigate prospective clients, it is almost impossible to find out whether they qualify on all these counts until you meet them face to face. You then find yourself in a delicate position, simultaneously selling your agency and eliciting from the prospect enough information about himself and his product to decide whether you want his account. It pays to listen more than you talk. In early days, I sometimes made the mistake of not exhibiting sufficient enthusiasm for the account I was soliciting. My style was too diffident. Thus, when Ted Moscoso, the brilliant head of Puerto Rico's Operation Bootstrap, first came to see me, he went away with the impression that it was a matter of indifference to me whether he hired us or not. It took me a long time to convince him that I really wanted to work for Puerto Rico. Shortly after our appointment as the agency for Puerto Rico, I wrote to Moscoso, "We must substitute a lovely image of Puerto Rico for the squalid image which now exists in the minds of most mainlanders. This is of cardinal importance to your industrial development, your rum industry, your tourism, and your political evolution. What is Puerto Rico? What is the personality of this island? What face shall Puerto Rico show to the world? Is Puerto Rico no more than a backward country in the throes of its industrial revolution? Is the island to remain what Max Ascoli calls the Formosa of the New Dealers? Is it in the process of becoming a latter-day North Philadelphia? Or is there a soul alive in the body economic? Is Puerto Rico to be overrun by vulgar tourists and changed into a second-class Miami Beach? Have Puerto Ricans forgotten their Spanish heritage in a mad rush to prove how American they are? These imminent tragedies need not be. And one of the surest ways to prevent them is to start a long-range advertising campaign that will present Puerto Rico to the world in the image which inspires us all, an image of Puerto Rico in Renaissance." Ted Moscoso and Governor Munoz accepted this proposal, and we launched the campaign which is still running 9 years later. It has had a profound effect on the fortunes of Puerto Rico. It is, I believe, the only instance of an advertising campaign changing the image of a country. One day in 1959, Moscoso and I were lunching with Beardsley Ruemel and Elmo Roper at the Century. Walking me back to my office, Moscoso said, "David, you've been doing our Puerto Rico advertising for 5 years. This afternoon, I'm going to telephone all your other clients and invite them to join me in a proposition. If you will stop soliciting new clients, we will promise never to fire you. Wouldn't you like to devote all your energy to the clients you already have and stop wasting your time in the pursuit of new ones?" I was sorely tempted to encourage this novel proposal. Landing new clients is exciting, but each one increases my load of homework. 80 hours a week are enough. But my younger partners were hungry for new challenges. What's more, even the best agencies lose accounts. Sometimes it happens that clients sell their companies. Sometimes they hire bullies to manage their advertising, and I always resign from the service of bullies. So, if you stop adding new clients, you start bleeding to death. But this doesn't mean that you have to follow Ben Duffy's example. When he was head of BBDO, he took every new account that was offered and wound up with 167. The pressure almost killed him. Stanley Resor was the opposite. In his first year as head of J. Walter Thompson, he resigned 100 accounts, unprofitable undergrowth. That was his first step in making JWT the biggest agency in the world. A posture of enthusiasm is not always the one best calculated to succeed. 5 or 6 times I have turned down accounts which did not meet our qualifications, only to find that the act of rejection inflamed the client's desire to hire our agency. When a famous Swiss watch manufacturer offered us his account, we declined because his advertisements had to be approved not only by headquarters in Switzerland but also by the American importer, and no advertising agent can serve 2 masters. But instead of declining in a straightforward way, I said that we would accept the account if we were paid 25% instead of the usual 15% commission. The client promptly agreed. Sometimes a manufacturer in search of a new agency releases to the newspapers the names of the agencies he is considering. Whenever we are revealed as one of the suitors, I withdraw from the contest. It is unwise to risk being publicly defeated. I like to succeed in public, but to fail in secret. I avoid contests in which more than 4 other agencies are involved. The ritual of competitive courtship requires a series of long meetings. A hot agency finds itself on the shopping list of almost every prospective client, and it is all too easy for its top man to fritter away his time in this way. We have other fish to fry, the fish of our present clients. The most desirable courtship is the kind which involves no other agency. This is becoming increasingly rare because corporate men now seem to think it naughty to hire a new agency without comparing the merits of several. In Chapter 4, I will offer them free advice on the right way to go about selecting a new agency. Most agencies send large delegations to present their case to prospective clients. Prospective clients. The head of the agency limits his own participation to introducing a series of subordinates who take turns haranguing the prospect. I have always preferred to make the presentation myself. The final choice of agency is almost always made by the head of the client company, and chairman should be harangued by chairman. I have also found that frequent changes of speaker lead to confusion with the other agencies which are competing for the account. One orchestra looks like every other orchestra, but there is no confusing one conductor with another. When we were invited to solicit the Sears Roebuck account, I bearded their board of directors by myself. Sophisticated corporations are seldom deceived by a show of bodies. The agencies with the best record in new business solicitation rely on their leader to put on solo performances. When you consider the repulsive personalities of many of these soloists, you are forced to conclude that singularity is an important ingredient in winning accounts. I always tell prospective clients about the chinks in our armor. I have noticed that when an antique dealer draws my attention to flaws in a piece of furniture, he wins my confidence. What are the chinks in our armor? The two most important are these. We have no public relations department. I take the view that public relations should be handled by the manufacturer himself or by specialist counsel. We have never produced a television spectacular. I have a phobia for these extravaganzas. With rare exceptions, they cost too much in relation to the size of the audience they deliver. Try as I may, I have never been able to space the acquisition of new accounts at convenient intervals. For months on end, nothing happens. I begin to wonder if we will ever get another account. My staff becomes despondent. Then we get 3 beauties in rapid succession, and the load of urgent work becomes unbearable. The only solution is to build a waiting list of would-be clients and to admit them one by one at times of our own choosing. That will be the day. That's it for today. If you enjoyed this video, you might want to check our link in the description, where you'll find many other fundamental advertising books in different languages. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more persuasion and marketing-related content. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again in the next video.